Welcome to Infinite Musician Television. I'm Dan Weiss, creator and owner of MFile Music Theory and Songwriting, where we're all about helping you gain control of your creative passion and power so you can become the musician that you are supposed to be, making the most amount of impact with your music by creating the music that you hear in your head. Welcome to our very first very sweaty episode of Infinite Musician TV. I'm pretty excited to get this ball rolling here with this. It's been a long time in the making. I've kind of been dabbling with a bunch of different things in preparation of this and moving towards this basically. But yeah, I'm happy that you're here to join me. And I mean, I'm so late because live streaming comes with a giant bag of technical issues no matter what or how prepared you are. So fingers crossed. But yeah, we'll start out with we've got some stuff. I'm going to talk about one of the bigger aha moments that I had in music school, revolving around like it's the secret inner workings of music. We're going to talk a bit about tips for writing better chord progressions, and we're also going to talk a bit about the 4 different types of chords. I know that can kind of be a thing that trips you up. There's so many different variations and things you can add or take away from chords, and it seems like there's a million, but really you can boil it down to just 4 types of chords. We're also gonna have a interview with my guest from this week, Chelsea McBride, leader of the Socialist Night School big band. That was actually really great to get to chat with her about managing a large band and being a strong female musician in a mostly male-dominated and historically sexist, unfortunately, job line of work. And but first we're gonna start it all off with a little story about me as a young lad when I first decided to go to music school. Basically I was not, I don't know, I was good at school if I was interested, but mostly I was not interested in school. So eventually, you know, my passion was really music, and I kind of decided to take a stab at it, you know, make a run and go do what I felt like I had to do, which was go to music school and become a better musician, become a better writer, really just gain more control of, you know, what it is that I really felt I had to get out there. So I worked really, really hard. I studied my face off and I practiced and I tried to get myself up to snuff to enter a jazz program. I was predominantly very much a rough around the edges, to say the least, rock and roll kind of musician. I was young and ripped jeans and Led Zeppelin, everything. So you can imagine coming into jazz school, oh, that was a bit of a shock, and I had to kind of refine a lot of things along the way. And but luckily I passed my audition. I got into school, which, you know, I felt like was such a huge accomplishment in it of itself. You know, I wanted to learn more about how music worked so that I could improve all my writing, and learning jazz would be the way to do that. But I wasn't totally sold on transforming into a jazz musician. So, you know, getting into school at that point was just the beginning, because the point of the program comes from, this is the stream of education and you're gonna become a jazz musician. Wasn't a whole lot of room to navigate that, which was kind of at odds with me being like, well, I just want to learn about crazy music theory stuff and how I can write better and expand my music. So there was so much more info that I had to deal with and process, and on top of all of that, everybody was really, really fucking good at their instruments. that can be intimidating, obviously, because if you play an instrument, you start making music with it, that it feels like it's a pretty intensely personal process some of the time. If that's where your music has traditionally been coming from, is making music from the heart and writing music, personal songs and things like that. So it can be tough to kind of transition into a place where everybody just seems like they're infinitely better than you and better than you will ever be. So that's a really tough thing to deal with. So then you start to kind of doubt yourself. You're like, do I even belong here? I struggled to get here, and now I'm here, and there's so much more work to be done. And there's always that nagging critic in the back of your head that's like asking you that question of like, do you really belong here? Have you really earned it? Are you supposed to be here? That was really, really tough. That was a tough situation to be in. So we started coming through the program, and there was a lot to adjust to. One particular thing, we had our weekly guitar private lesson. It was kind of like guitar masterclass, basically. We'd sit in a room, and there'd be like 3 of us, I think there was 3 or 4 of us that were in my original private lessons that first year. And man, the stuff that we were talking about was just going over my head. We had an incredible teacher. But he was very professorish in his approach to guitar, which like did not jive with me at all. And he was very much of the school of like, I'm going to talk to you like you should understand this. Flies. And that was hard because I was still trying to grasp the most basic stuff, and he was throwing some very advanced things right away to be like, this is going to help you and whatever. So I was immediately drowning. I wasn't understanding all of the things that we were being asked to do. They'd be talking about stuff, and I'd be writing things down, and I'd feel like I had it. But then I would go home and I would look at my notes, and I'd be like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to practice. I'm not sure I understand what this is. And sometimes asking, more often than not, actually kind of led to a bit of like chastising. The classic, there's no angle, just do it. Like, I need clarity so I can do it. So that led to some tension, and I started getting angrier because I felt like I wasn't getting what I should out of it. And the teacher was definitely feeling like I'm not putting the effort in. So now we have an impasse. We have a setup for some conflict. It was tough. So we study all semester, and we come up to the exam time. And basically it was like, okay, everything we've been learning up to this point is going to be on this exam. So I'm studying and I'm trying to figure everything out. And we had to put together a chord melody, which, for those who don't know, you basically have like bass notes and chords, like rhythm, as well as the melody going on at the same time on the guitar. So you're basically playing your guitar like a piano, approaching it like a pianist would. So that takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of relearning your instrument if you're not used to thinking of guitar that way. So I was like, I'm going to nail this. I know that this is tough, and I want to take on this challenge, and I want to make something of it. So I plowed through, and I stayed up all night and just putting this thing together, and I felt like I had achieved something. Like, at the very least, if I screw up everything else, then this will at least get me some kind of respect, and I can show that I tried. So first thing that Friday morning, that gray, fateful Friday morning, I walked in and, you know, we started doing stuff and he'd asked me to do something and I was like, and I didn't get it. It was like a complete, like some of the things I didn't get it quick enough. So he's like, no, you don't know it. Next. And some of the things he would tell me and I'd be like, I don't know what you're asking me. He's like, okay, fine. And so that happened a couple times and, you know, I botched it. And that was a really hard thing. And I'm just, you know, getting the flop sweat and just can feel that, like, he doesn't care, you know, kind of thing. And it's like, I do care. I don't know how to show you. So he just started, like, you know, that's it. Like, just pack up. Like, you're done. Like, I didn't even get to show you my chord melody. Like, let me show you this. Can I at least play this for you? And he, like, turned to me and was like, okay, play it in A flat. And of course, I had learned it in B flat. So I'm like, and looking, and I can't start. I'm trying to figure things out. And he just goes, see, you don't know it. You don't know the music. You just memorized the shapes. Pack your stuff. Better luck next time. I was like, my whole world crumbled. That was a really hard one. I was so upset. I was very angry. I slammed the door when I left. Made a big, stupid, childish scene a bit. Because I felt so burned. You know, like, this is what I'm supposed to be good at. I worked so hard to get here. So I'm obviously supposed to be here. And I can't even get a fucking fair shake. And that was rough, you know? Like, I had felt these kind of feelings in a much, much smaller sense in the past, where it's like I wanted to be part of stuff. I felt like I was on the outside of people who were playing music and I wanted to be a part of it. But there was never any experience that was like that. That stuck with me really hard. Those words stuck with me. And I remember, like, trying to scoff it off and be like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, I learned it, you know? But it always was like burning in the back of my head for so long. So, you know, even if I didn't immediately understand it, that was always kind of this motivation, I think. I decided, like, I'm never gonna have a situation like this ever again. I don't want to feel such utter defeat and failure over something that is clearly important to me. Like, this is what I want to do. I want to go to school for it. So I gotta just pick up my boots. I'm gonna study. I want to understand how music works. If I really don't already, if that's the case, then fine. I want to study and I want to get really good. And I went to town. With tonal harmony and jazz harmony and everything, I really wanted to peel back all the layers and figure out, like, what am I doing wrong? How is it that I'm approaching this differently? And, you know, so the years went on. We get into second year, middle of second year, and that's like the hell year. There's so many crazy projects that they put in front of you, and so many assignments, and you're juggling all of these things. It's a crazy busy time. And you hit that wall. You get the burnout with all this workload. And I think they kind of did it on purpose. Because it's like, if you can somehow manage to get through all of this, then you're golden. If you find a way to survive this, you're always going to look back and be like, well, at least it wasn't as bad as this. You can always take another challenge, right? But all the classes were just dumping so much info. There was so many details to keep track of, you know, and the workload You know, I was taking jazz harmony, tonal harmony, ear training, 18th century counterpoint, which is just like studying melody in the style of Bach, how it moves against other melodies and stuff. Like, that was really important. And of course, arranging. Oh yeah, let's learn to write multi-instrumental projects, and just it was insane. Like, I thought I was gonna blow up at some point every single day. And on top of all of that, it just felt like all the classes were compartmentalized, which is silly because they're all about music, but they're dealing with what I assumed was just different topics. Well, like, we've got counterpoint. Counterpoint is counterpoint. Arranging is arranging. Jazz harmony is the harmony of jazz. But I felt like I had somehow lost knowledge about music instead of making any progress. Like, I felt like I was just swimming in a sea of all these details, and I wasn't sure if I could keep my head above water. So it's coming up to exams. You know, it's crunch time, and I've got all these papers and all these assignments spread out over my bed from all these different classes, and I'm trying to organize everything. And it was like, I'm looking at all these things, and I'm looking at all the different information that we have for each class, you know, at this time. And it was just like light bulb moment. And I could see how all of the lessons were actually somehow about the same thing, and everything was connected. There were threads of ideas here going to this class, and this class was like connecting to this. And it wasn't like totally like it had been happening maybe the whole time, I don't know, but that was that moment where I really got it. And it was like I just shot through space, had that karmic realignment moment with the universe where it was just everything got so simplified. So it was like going back and organizing my ideas of music and drawing conclusions, and I was able to reduce so much of the musical process and what we were learning to the very simplest general idea of everything is tension and release. You know, everything is, and that's the same for like storytelling. That's the same for writing a book. That's the same for a movie. It's the same for a song or a symphony or, you know, whatever. There's that's such a fundamental component to storytelling and creating something that moves and takes you somewhere. It's controlling the levels of tension and the levels of release. You know, and that kind of completely changed my understanding of music, songwriting, improvising, just creating in general. It was this irreducible thing. It was like Rene Descartes' I think therefore I am, the irreducible minimum. All music, everything is tension and release. And I mean, we'll talk tons more about all the different facets of how we can approach this in every possible way. But realistically speaking, you know, you build up tension with your chords to release them. Your chord moving from one chord to another, there's tension and release, or tension and more tension, or tension and only some release, but not all the way because it's not final yet. You know, and when you start, like, if you have a song that you're working on right now and you feel like this is a new idea, or like it's hitting you in a new way, then look at some of your old songs and see how you've implemented it, maybe without realizing it, or how you can continue to implement these types of ideas, and try and map out the shape of the entire song. try and map out the shape of each part of the song, each chord progression or phrase, or and keep reducing it down and seeing what is moving, what's causing tension, and what gives release to that tension. Because you may start to see like, oh, I'm giving all of it away before like the climax of the song. And then it's happened so many times that what's supposed to be the most important part is now no longer new. It's just the same. We've been here already. So I want you guys to really internalize that, because I think that's one of the biggest foundation ideas that you can have in music. And when you're building upon that, if you're keeping that as a fundamental, then you're always going to be able to come up with something that really genuinely moves and progresses. That's the name of the game, folks. So that takes us to, I've just gotta, oh darn it. All right, I am going to take a brief second here. Naturally, live streaming always has its consequences. I had this up and it disappeared. So I was very lucky to be able to talk with a good friend and musical associate, Chelsea McBride, the other day. She was very kind in giving me a bit of her time to chat about her musical journey and the processes that she's gone through, and about running a big band and approaches to composition and everything. And so here we go. We've got this portion of the show, and I hope you guys take something from it, because I feel these interviews are going to be really insightful. They're as much fun for me to do as they will be, challenging and opening that musical third eye for you. Fingers crossed. So here we go. Come on.
That should be good. Are we doing audio and video? Or are we doing
video?
A
little bit of both. I mean,
cool.
Just get as much mileage out of the content as possible.
Oh yeah. You get the full flat post shower hair for this one.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hey, it's greasy mountain man on my end, so I find this really helps me from the temptation of going out and grabbing a drink and being like, everything's fine, because they won't let me in anywhere. They'll be like, shove along, come on.
Also, I guess bars are open there, eh? So
yeah, it's kind of weird, because it's like, do we have a cure yet? And they're like, go drink. It's like, oh.
It's like, that's not a cure.
I want to, but I'm not going to.
It feels like a solution, but it truly isn't.
A classic Simpsons quote. Alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Oh my goodness.
But yes, the extremely talented multi-instrumentalist, that's a good woodwind trick.
Yes.
Chelsea McBride, it's great to see you and chat with you again. It's been quite a while, probably one of the last Koopa Troop.
Oh yeah, it's been a couple of years for sure.
Yeah, I think. Well, Orion was born because we did bring him to one of the last gigs you guys had. I think it was an Afterfunk show.
I may not have been there. I left the Koopa Troop in the beginning of last year, I guess. It's been about a year and a half since I played with them. Okay. But that's a fun stint though.
Yeah. Well, I was really stoked that there was something like that was finally happening, that I could easily go to. I had access to the band members. I always knew when they were playing. There was a good chance we were going to be playing a show together. And it's just all hardcore, incredibly talented musicians playing classic retro video game music, which is
it's so much fun. And the video game music community internationally, which I've been lucky to get into, partly through working with the Koopa Troop and partly through just knowing people and like being visible online. It's not a big community, and for the most part it is super supportive and it is just super cool. I've met only the best of people really through that, and it's been a lot of fun because everyone is so spread out. There's a lot of stuff that happens online, and a lot of the discussion, a lot of these friends I have, it's all sort of living in these online spaces, which is really handy, especially now in the end times, because there isn't really another way to share stuff. And it was also just really good for me. I've been a nerd since I was a kid, and I was really lucky to have good video game access when I was a kid. So I played a lot of the classic Mario games, and like they were at my grandma's house and we went there after school, or we had, I think my brother had the consoles in his room, or we would have them in like the living room or whatever. And I was just really lucky to get into that music and all of that really early on. And then I went to music school, and that actually just didn't leave me enough time or money when I was first breaking into the scene to like be a nerd. So after that, I was taking every opportunity I could to be in the video game world. And like things have settled. I now own a Switch. I am playing, I play PC games, but it took a really long time.
Ever. I was so happy to get one. That's the first time I've got like a new console, like a current generation console probably since the 64, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I was always one behind. My uncle was super into it, and so we would get whatever console he like didn't have. But I also I dug the Atari out of our grandma's basement when I was a teenager, and that was a really interesting experience. I'm not like, I like to describe myself in the video game world as like very much a casual. I don't have time. Yeah. even in the end times, like I don't have time. So I really like diving into games that are it doesn't really matter the tone, but like a good art style that are like, they're fun. They're like concise. They have good stories and good music, or they're just like fun little romps that you can like pick up and put down. Dead Cells being one of those that I haven't revisited in a while.
I've heard good things about Dead Cells.
and also like it's been 5, 6, 7 years, and I now own Mario Kart again, so like all is right with the world. Truly.
And another in terms of like music related soundtracks and stuff, like a lot of the Super Nintendo games, like Squaresoft was the classic. They had such a good everything, but I always found that it was the soundtracks, like with Chrono Trigger and the Final Fantasies and all that, just these amazing sweeping scores, but they would get so much depth to the game. I feel like the better the music started getting, it was more acceptable as a whole as an art form. You know what I mean?
It's so interesting to dig into the history of that too. The first video game composers were like programmers as much as they were composers. Yeah. And then as the technology moved, you had opportunities to create more sweeping scores. You had more than 8 tracks to work with, or 8 things to work with, right? And I think of it, especially like with the processing power that exists now, it's a lot more like a film score. And you're really using that music to set the scene and to set the tone. Which is why we're all programmed to like when a little loading icon shows up or when the music changes, you're like, oh, it's a boss battle, right? Like we've had this like Pavlovian thing programmed into our brain,
right?
And so now we're like that too. But I think it speaks a lot to like the people who were building these games in the first place to understand that like, yeah, this is like sound reinforcement and creating this immersive world. Like that's so important too, right?
Well, it was like an extension of the medium of film, but you get to play it. So naturally film and music go a lot hand in hand. So it's the next reasonable extension of it as well to have really good music. So like there was people that didn't really try. We know that, there's some absolute diarrhea on the Nintendo, but at the same time, there's some really, really good, like Mega Man. All the Mega Mans have incredible music. The games aren't always good, but anything Tim Follin does, that's a serious composer right there. And I feel so bad for the guy because he's written some of the best video game music, and most of the games are garbage or like untouchable, like Silver Surfer, you know, whatever.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing, because I think that also, I mean, the thing that I find really cool about the video game music world too is that, like, as someone who holds like a bachelor's degree in music, I'm kind of a minority, or that's not a thing that happens to everybody, and like it really speaks in a way to like, yes, school's great, like that kind of like formal training is cool, but it's not the be all end all. You could still make good music without it. And I feel like that about anything that involves like a really large team, where like you can have really good people in a room and the alchemy just doesn't work sometimes, where like maybe the music is great, but the game is super janky, or just something doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to. But then you can have people that are not like good or trained or whatever your construct is here, and it can come together and make something that is so much bigger than the sum of its parts. And I mean, that's a good band or a good orchestra. Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. One person can drag the whole thing down, but if you get everyone working together and really being a part of that collective, then you get something that is better than everybody's best, I think.
That's absolutely true. I mean, like, I love a good Paul McCartney record, but I will take, you know, Abbey Road hands down any day.
Yeah.
You know, it's like all of them were musical geniuses, but when you could get them to at least face in the same direction, you had a masterpiece.
Yeah.
But so on the topic of the video games thing, because I know I've talked to a lot of people where it's like they get into music, and like in this age, it's like, what got you into it? And some of the first real exposure to music was the video games in a lot of ways. Like there's the music that's playing on the radio, the parents, you know, like I had really good music growing up with like classic rock and Motown stations all the time in my house. So it was like a really good foundation to have. But when you're sitting and playing a video game like 6-7 hours in the day on a Saturday and your parents are yelling at you to get outside, you're internalizing the music too.
Yeah.
And I think there were a lot of almost like complicated song forms or embellishments and things that I was internalizing as a kid without really realizing it. And then when I went to start playing music, it was all kind of there, programmed. Like, would you say you had kind of a similar stepping into the world of music? No?
Video games are definitely a part of it. But I feel like that whole nerd side of me doesn't necessarily live in the same space as music. It's nice to put it all together.
It's compartmentalized a little bit.
When I was a kid, my dad was on the radio. Like he was a DJ for a little while. He was in radio for a really long time. And my parents are both music lovers. So it's a similar story to yours in that sense. I was just always around music. It was a lot of country when I was a kid, actually. And a little bit of like, Motown and some of the classics. Like I'm blanking on a bunch of stuff because I am deeply in the middle of a Christmas project right now. And so I'm thinking of like, oh, it's like the Eartha Kitt version of this Christmas tune, or the Eurythmic version of this Christmas tune, or like Stevie Wonder, or right. But I got into pop music. Ultimately, there's sort of like the AAA format in radio. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it's like the kind of stuff that you would hear on Boom here in Toronto, right? Or like the sort of greats of the 70s and 80s and 90s. That's the stuff that I like knew, and then I got into jazz in high school. But I also, in tandem with all of that, I took music lessons from when I was really little. I was 2 or 3, and I've been in lessons basically, like that was all I did in school or outside of school. I took piano lessons, I took voice lessons, I eventually started taking saxophone lessons, I played in band, I was like doing honor bands and stuff like that outside of school. I managed to get into grade 12 and take like half non-music classes and half music classes.
That's pretty lucky.
I was pretty lucky. I switched schools to pull that one off, but not without a lot of it was hard. It was a hard decision to make, especially to switch career last year. And, you know, I was like 17. I had no idea what I was doing. but I figured that much out, right?
You had put that much into it at that point that it, you know, like a lot of people when they're like, you know what, I want to try and go and do, like for me, going and doing music school, like it was more, I started playing guitar when I was 15, 16. Mm-hmm. So like that's relatively late kind of in the game. And I was playing it more for me. I got to take guitar classes in high school, but it was like a last minute decision. All of a sudden I was like, you know what? I'm skipping class to play guitar with my buddies in the parking lot anyway. Like might as well go and try music school and do that. And it was like, I feel like that's there's two camps of like people who are like, you know what, fuck it, I'll just try it. And there's people who have been like groomed and trained into like music machines like you. Like, I feel like that was a really good like lot to kind of fall into. Like, was it ever a thing where you were like in diapers still and like, I want to play the saxophone? And they're like, okay.
I had no idea I wanted to play the saxophone when I was in diapers. I can guarantee you that much. I feel like for me, it was a lot of, I think a lot of people have an aha moment. And that's one of the things that comes up in a lot of interviews. Like, what was your aha moment? When did you decide to do music? It's like, it was the only thing I was doing. And it was the only thing I was good at. And it's been nice as an adult to like go back and rediscover stuff that I had an interest in. Mm-hmm. Because I found that being in school full time for 4 years really took away from that. And I mean, there's other life stuff too. And, you know, we don't need to get into my bad dating decisions on a podcast, but like everything plays into it. You're not a person in a bubble. But I really did feel like for the duration of my music degree, it's like I was in school and I was a student, and then I got out of school, and of course you have to be a person. And so there's been a lot
hard adjusting. There's
been a lot.
Such a weird thing stepping out into the real world again after music school and being like, oh shit, there's more.
There's more
than just this thing that's consumed me for 4 years. Like,
and like I was fine through high school, but I got injured in first year, like playing, like just strain injuries from playing saxophone. And so it got to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, this is my like pride and love and joy. And I compose as well. Like I play a bunch of different woodwinds, but like my body literally will not let me play for 8 hours a day. Yeah. And I can't be at a computer for 8 hours a day. I do that. It's not to say this doesn't happen, but like I feel it. And video games are also in that land of like stuff you do with your hands that's gonna like I'm getting too old now. I say old, I'm not 30 yet. But like not even 30, and I'm already, you know, like the parts of my shoulder like click and crunch when I move them, and like my ankles are actually, I'm not a very cracky person, but if I were, my ankles would be a symphony, right? Like you start to not even like wear out in a bad way. It's just like my body decided a long time ago that it's lazy. It doesn't want to do this stuff. And like I exercise and I feed it and I tell it that I love it, right? And we all have these differing relationships with our body, but for mine, it's like you can't just do one thing. No. And that's really nice because my brain wants to do one thing. My brain has always been like, I want to be a musician. This is my only career path. This is the only thing I'm good at. And leaving music school and being like a real grown up has really been a study in like, okay, but what else can you do? Right. Who else are you? Like, what are you as this person when you're not making music or when you don't have an instrument in your face? Yeah.
It's a really intense time because it's so consuming and it feels like you're going to literally burst into either tears or flames at any given moment through several years. But then you get out and you realize like they were doing as much of it as they could in a short amount of time because you're not going to be able to focus like that when you get out.
Yeah. And you know, by necessity, like as much as I am very much one of those artists who's like, this is my calling, this is my passion, it's my career. I get to put all these things I get to put all these eggs in the same basket. I guess that's the idiom. But like, also like you have friends and family and partners, you have kids, like, yep. This is a whole that has nothing to do with music. And it doesn't mean that you can't share that and love that and have that be a part of like a big part of your life. But yeah, you get out of school and it's like, oh, okay, like this can't be my only personality trait anymore.
It was good enough to loosely hold together your associations in school, but it's like, you know, once you're out there and you're going to go your separate way and you got to make your own way. Cause it's like, it's you have I noticed like music school has the same kind of traits as like, say, partying or addiction or anything like that, where it's like you create an environment where everyone's kind of like, this is what's happening. So you just normalize it. And so everybody's talking about like facets of the Lydian chromatic concept and like, oh, what can we do with this? And that just becomes your regular afternoon, or like talking about like ripping apart types of approaches to solos over chords or whatever. And then you leave and you lose that, you know, like it's like, it's not okay to just approach a random person and be like, hey, can you give me some approaches on like your instrument? I'm doing an arrangement and I'm wondering how you approach a sharp 5 in this kind of situation. And they look at you like you're fucked.
Well, it depends who you're talking to, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. But you're not going to walk out of a door and run into literally anybody who would engage in a conversation like that with you. So it's like, it's good and bad in that way, where it's like it kind of coddles you into thinking there's always going to be this kind of time and this kind of situation. But it also is like really good for developing that kind of thing and maybe pushing you to seek out that kind of connection after the fact, to kind of move you forward as a musician. You know, like you don't want to get stale or get too comfortable in, I have a life and I'm too busy and I don't want to, but then you don't progress. You know what I mean? There's
a lot there. Cause I think that like one of the selling points and the deepest flaws of music school is the pressure cooker, right? Mm-hmm. And we're sort of speaking at an interesting time, like in the wake of call out movements around Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And I think it's important to know, I mean, like I've been following all the This Is Art School stuff, which comes out of Toronto and Montreal, and has been deeply eye-opening to see the level of just like embedded discrimination that happened in music school, in art school, in a lot of ways. And when you're in that sort of pressure cooker environment and you're not made to feel super welcome, which I mean is a thing that happened to me very early in my Humber days, it's hard, right? On top of trying to just be good at your craft and trying to learn and trying to find your people, you are surrounded by stuff that maybe doesn't help your learning, right? That isn't going to help you be a better person. And then you get out and it's like, okay, now you have time to breathe and think about these things, but you haven't put any effort into it for 4 years. And I think there is something to be said for the immersion in just like music. And I think that's really powerful. And I think it's really important. Having done, you know, summer camps and stuff like that, like little workshops where you get a week or two or maybe sometimes more, and that's all you do is you're really focusing on like getting a set together for a little end of week concert, or just like deepening your practice and your craft. And that is the thing that institutions are really good at, is giving you the space and the time and the focus to do that and very little else. But I think the trade-off is that like, yeah, you forget all the other stuff. And it gets hard to sort of come back out there and be like, okay, I'm a musician, but I'm also this. And yeah, you're not going to be able to talk about the Lydian chromatic concept, which is a book none of the people talking about it have read.
No.
It's out of print.
It's like $800 on Amazon, because it's like,
yeah, you need to be a certain age and very rich to have actually read that book. So anyone who talks about it that is our age is talking nonsense.
I get some really good watered down articles about the general ideas, and I like to throw it around like money on the table, you know.
And I think that like in that sense, one of the challenges in school and out of school, right, is who do you surround yourself with? Because I've been pretty lucky growing up in Vancouver and then moving out here. I have friends on, you know, I would say both coasts, but we all know that Toronto is the center of the universe and has no coast.
So says Toronto.
The lake does not count. I have strong feelings about how incorrect all of these assertions are.
Right.
But the point is that like there's so much research out there psychologically about like how you are in a sense, the sum of the people that you surround yourself with. This gets tagged to weight, but it's also tagged to like lifestyle and habits and things like that. And I think that musically, it's a really interesting thing. And it's something that I've looked at in my friend circle as I've grown up. Like I just started dating a really lovely man. And one of his first things when I started introducing him to my friends was like, your friends are so cool. Like your friends have this thing going for them. And that to me was like, I think probably the first time that I've heard it said, which is nice. I like my friends. I know they're great.
Getting an outside perspective. It's like,
and getting an outside perspective that's like, they're supportive. They're, if you go to them with something and, you know, like, I get a lot of free emotional labor from my friends, and conversely, I give it as well because that's a thing I can do. But like, I've seen the community sort of rally in that like sort of small, informal way. And I have groups of friends that are really cool to talk about music stuff with, but also like hockey or self-care or gestures at everything, this world that we currently live in that is, you know, 18 weeks into lockdown here in Toronto. It's all fine. Nothing could possibly go right. And it has made the last 18 weeks easier knowing that there is a group of people that I have met mostly through the music industry and mostly, but not entirely through school, a lot through friends of friends. And this community is really sort of banding together and just like, we need to protect each other. Let's be cautious. Like, let's be honest about our struggles. Let's talk about all the ways in which this is a huge deal. Let's talk about ways we can go back to gigging safely. Let's like, it's not necessarily that this is the topic of conversation all the time, but the willingness to have that chat is there. Yeah.
That's the one thing that it surprised me and didn't about how, because, you know, like your Facebook friends and everything, it's like the close circle of people that you usually see or hear from or whatever. So when things started, you know, falling apart, it was amazing to see how much positive stuff I was able to have counteracting all the garbage that was going on because of everybody I knew from music. And exactly how you were saying, it's like, they're talking about ways that they can get through it. They're constantly checking in and just throwing out blanket posts to be like, hey, if anybody needs to talk, message me. And there's a lot to be said for, you know, the experience of the musician, like as an individual is a journey and it is battering and you go through a lot. So it helps you hopefully become a bit more self-aware. So I saw this kind of in action as things were going wrong for everybody. All these musicians were standing up in whatever way they could and being like, I got this, I'll help. Putting together groups where there's performances and playing for people and doing all kinds of things just to be like, let's just remind each other that we're still connected, because that connection is so important and we understand that it's important because we know what it's like to be lonely.
And we work from home. We spend a lot of time in our little boxes practicing. Like the fundamental thing of like, do you want to be good at your instrument? You need to practice. Even if you only do it for an hour a day, like this is still, that's a lot of time that we get to spend by ourselves that other people don't spend in their offices or at their jobs. Like there are a lot of people out there who
being alone with your thoughts can be very scary if you're not used to it.
I have been telling all of my friends with like, I'm going to use very heavy air quotes on this, real jobs, but like people who don't have that sort of artistic bent to what they do, where they're required to be alone and to be really in the details and to be really in their head. Those are the people who've all been cracking under the pressure. Right. And so when I talk to my friends about stuff like that, it's like, okay, first of all, welcome to my Tuesday. Have fun. Second of all, right, there are ways we can deal with this. And because like one of the things that I got really into after school, you know, like young kid, not really knowing what to make of all this free time. Got really into productivity and efficiency and like all the stuff around work motivation and stuff like that. I've also like, I have my own mental health struggles. So that's a big part of why I look into all this stuff, because sometimes depression brain kicks in or hormone brain kicks in. And it's like, too bad, you're in bed. What you gonna do? So when I'm feeling good, I want to be like there, right? I want to be really good. And one of the things that taught me is like, you actually need to give yourself that time to be alone with your thoughts, sure, but also to like cope with big things or big stressors as they happen, to like read before bed, like to not be looking at your phone. These little ways that we can build pauses into our day to sort of adjust, because then when everything else is on fire, what you have within yourself, this is going to sound so wishy-washy, is this nice little warm, safe place.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing to have. And it's doubly important when you're in the arts and you're already super insecure and your brain doesn't like you all the time.
And also like your art is a product of you. It's coming through you. It's coming through your lens of perception. So like you need to keep your mind and your body focused and ready and able to communicate that as best as possible.
Yeah.
You want to be able to really capture something, if you're off, if you're just kind of phoning it in because you're not doing the steps and taking care of yourself, then your art suffers, and you suffer as a result of your art suffering. And then the people who are like looking forward to it, there's people out there that you could be making an impact with your art that aren't gonna quite get it, so yeah. It's like what would be part of like the system that you go about? Because like whether it's any kind of project that's going on any given day, there's usually some kind of way that you would approach sitting down, right? Like getting a system or a process going. Like you obviously will have like your own workspace probably that's like, this is designated and this is what happens.
I have many opinions on this, because on top of just like being a productivity geek, I also have I've lived alone, I've lived with roommates, I've lived with partners. So I have sort of the experience of like having to navigate space.
Right.
I cannot advocate strongly enough for separate workspaces.
Yes.
Separate spaces. If you live, especially like if you live with people who are also arty and who also need their space to do things, you cannot share space. Yep. There's a way to sort of like share parts of your space for different purposes. Like, if there's a practice room, that's actually my current setup here is we have two musicians in the house most of the time. And so we have a shared practice room that we sort of balance between. I would also teach out of there, but then all of our other stuff happens in our own rooms.
Right.
I think that like beyond that also, I'm sort of like the chaotic influence in all of this, to get into like role-playing terms. I don't have like a system or a schedule per se, but I have ways of organizing, and I have things that I do to sort of signal to my brain like, okay, it's work time.
Right.
And I think that in lieu of like, some people are very much like, I wake up at 7 a.m. and I play my long tones and then I go do this. And it's like, that's great. I'm never awake at 7 a.m. You want to rise with the birds? Like, go do your thing. I support you. I come from a family of morning people. So like, I'm usually awake when people get up, and like, even here I'm the last person awake, and that's fine. That just is what it is.
Yeah.
But it is way less connected to time for me. And way more about like, okay, I'm going to get up today, and like usually breakfast and tea, and then that's when my workday starts.
Right.
I'm a big believer in having my space set up a certain way. I'm actually like this close to tweaking it again, which is the thing I do probably like 2 or 3 times a year when I get bored.
Right.
And I've been staring at the same setup for 18 weeks and it blocks my window. So I'm like, this needs to change, but I also like how it's set up. Right. And so it becomes sort of an evolving process. In a time like this where I don't have as much work as I normally do, things aren't as crazy busy, or it's a lot looser, I actually give myself more structure. So I have daily to-do lists. They're pretty specific. I have more little things that I try and sneak into each of my days. But when it's really busy, that gets cut down, and it's like, okay, do the absolute essentials. When you need to sit down and like send this email, like make yourself a nice little cup of tea and like sit down, like, I'm a really big believer in just like getting yourself into that mood. And that's not always about like, part of it is about how your workspace is set up and making it efficient, making sure everything you need is within reach, making sure that it looks good, like that things are pleasing. This is like my bedroom, and it's very eclectic and weird right now, but it makes me happy. This is probably the most decorating I've done in a long time. When you go into a space that makes you feel happy or productive, or both, ideally, you're going to get more work done. And
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
your tools are close at hand, you'll feel a lot better about it. So it's really just like setting yourself up for success, and then also taking certain temptations away. Like, because I came in, my phone is right here, but normally it's plugged in on my bed, so I have to get out of my chair to reach it.
That's smart.
Yeah. And it does sit next to my bed, which is also not entirely advisable. If you're like going super by the book, your phone is in another room, but none of us do that because we're millennials and these things are attached to us. So like
we'll post a meme that says it, but we'll never actually do it.
Yeah. But
it's
I
all
really
about
do
keeping
think
up
it's
appearances.
It's such a practice of getting into that.
Having a space finally, like that's been a challenge for me, obviously, with like 2 kids and a partner, and living in traditionally very small apartments.
Yes.
it's harder to find that space. So having it's like a tiny room and there's a closet. So it's like door. Whoa, and then there's a bit of a space.
You have a closet? We need to talk about this.
Yeah. It's like full of like boxes and bags of cables and cases and stuff. It's like music stuff that I'm not using at the moment. So it goes over there. And then I've got my guitars finally hung up on the wall. So I don't have to put them away when I'm not using them, because that is such a big deterrent. If something pops in my head, I can literally reach right here and grab a bass or a guitar or whatever. I've got the keyboard right here. Like, it's like workstation for editing. I've got the mixer. I've got everything on here. It's like supreme studio, but also office. And then I have my entire video game collection right here. And every system is hooked up in a shelf, like right beside. And I run all these cables into my computer so I can just like play. Anything. I
love this because it's like ease of music and ease of gaming all in the same setup. I actually do have to leave this room to get to the video games.
Well, so, it's also because I was doing like streaming on Twitch for a little while, just because I was like, if I want to do this, I want to be able to be creating content, but also play video games and not feel guilty about it because I have a baby. So it's like combining all of these things. I can talk about music and interact with people. Like, I hopefully will be able to get that kind of going again soon, but it's just kind of a way to create more content and talk with people and play video games and talk about video games as well. So it's like merging all the lines of the things I like to do in a way that's productive.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's what it is. I mean, like, it's for people who work in industries where it's like it's entertainment, it's not productive, it's like, no, there's work that goes into this. Like, you still have to work. You're allowed to enjoy the video games you play as you make them, but like, just as you're allowed to like enjoy this piece of art that you're making, like there's always a project curve, and I'm like fully in the low spot of it right now, but that's just like the wave that comes with it, where you get to a point you're like, oh, this is really cool, I'm super excited, this is really starting to sound great, oh, but it's super derivative, someone's done this before, I really don't think I'm writing at my best, I've definitely stolen this from someone, but this is really cool and it doesn't matter because I'm going to make it original. Like, this keeps going.
The important part of that curve, I'm glad that you brought this up, because you have that initial like adrenaline of something new, and then you start ragging on it, and then so many people stop right here.
Yeah, getting through that low is,
you have to push. That's such a big, because then you finish, and even if some of this stuff was true and it's coming from like a place in reality and it's not just all saboteur in your head, there's still like, you gotta finish it. And you can fix it when it's done, but just get it done and like have that accomplishment. That's like a huge, huge, huge thing that I really want to try and instill, because like I keep throwing out hooks and asking questions and being like, what do you have problems with? And a big one is just finishing songs. And that's such a trap, right? Because like it just happens when you start working
for this. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's always the shiny new thing, and something else happens or you get busy or whatever. But it's like, if you just put in an extra fucking 15 minutes and you get it done, like just, and then it'll be done. And then you can fix it and change it however you want. But I don't know, like,
this is an interesting one for me, because like in the process of growing up, I've also had to come to terms with the fact that I'm an optimist, but I'm not about certain things. And one of them is definitely like in the creative process where it's like, oh, this is super derivative. It's not very original. You're definitely just like stealing from something else here, right? That sort of like pessimism can be a really useful voice in the revision process because it means you have to look at something and I teach this as like it has to pass the bullshit test. But it really does. It has to, you have to be able to like listen to something and be like, okay, maybe it's like the worst thing is true about it, but also does it serve the piece? Yes. Or does it serve the intention of this? This is how I feel about like a lot less music actually, and more like visual media, video games and movies and TV shows, is you can really tell, especially like in this Netflix era of the 58-minute episode, like a lot of that is filler.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you need it. Sometimes
just because it's 58 minutes doesn't mean it's epic.
and I think we're losing that sense of like concise, well-constructed art. And when I look at pieces now, especially pieces that start getting really long, it's like, does it need to be? And the answer is usually yes. Does it need to be this long? I will like set out to write short pieces and they'll just be like, you need 3 minutes to develop the statement. It's like, right. Really? Really? Because it was like 3 seconds of material in my head when I started.
Well, that is a good thing, because I was actually just working on some articles and stuff today that was kind of touching on motivic development and that idea of working on a melody and the like starting simple and going with it, right? Because there's the original idea of like melody or hooks or whatever, it's supposed to be a theme. Like if we're going all the way back to like classical music and how a theme or a motif runs through the entire orchestra and a symphony, and it comes back and it changes key for an effect or a mood. It'll change, like go from major to minor in a certain part like that, and it's that idea that this one small thing grew into this big thing, and it's therefore this tying force. It's all connected. You don't have to throw a bunch of different ideas and have one big, long, complicated melody to make it, it's the best. It's so good.
And this is our thing, right? Artists get pigeonholed as being like flaky or like all over the place. And it's like, we're idea people. This is what we do. We are creative types. And learning that instinct to finish things that is a learned or taught, or like you don't start like that, and I think one of the interesting things is that you also see a fair subset of artists that are like, I start a thing and then I get really anxious, but I have to finish it because I will be anxious if it's unfinished and if it just hangs there. And I mean, I'm not here to say there's like a right or wrong way to the process, but I'm very much a finisher. I don't actually start a whole lot of new things. I do a lot of things, but I don't run all that many. And the stuff that I do start, it's very much like, it's usually pretty well thought out before I put pen to paper. Like when I make records, the track sequence is already there, which is something that not a lot of other artists do, because I know I need to know what the contour of it is before I go into it. And if I'm filling in pieces of the story or something like that, like I've learned also to have room for the details to change and shift, and for the sequence to move around, because that's also sort of part of the game. Like it just happens. It's not going to go exactly the way you planned. But the thing that I've really, that like I just do, is it all needs to be there before I really get too deep into it. Because that's where I tell if an idea has legs, and if I can build an hour-long symphony out of 3 notes, or right, or if you can score a video game in one key entirely, Super Mario Brothers, like,
incredible.
That's probably all the notes they had, right? Like this is 1985.
That's true. They could only work
was
in that. Then. There was no space. We put too many blocks in, so we had to cut out most of the musical choices you can make.
Yeah, everything's in the key of C. Is it not brilliant though? Like
it is. Well, sometimes working with a constriction like that actually makes you more creative than if you just had a blank page to start with. If you're coming at it from solving a problem, then you're turning on different parts of your brain that are potentially more creative, right? Like I'm sure there's, I mean, I don't want to say like school assignment type stuff, but in that kind of way, you know, because like nobody's super excited for jazz harmony listening to everybody's songs all day. Like that's not necessarily like this is the best day ever. You get a few good ones that are like, that was pretty surprising. But usually it's just like, I'm kind of happy that the onus isn't on me to like pay too much attention or I'll flunk the next test. But
I mean, that's sort of the cool part, is to hear everybody's process too, right? Because like the way that they're interpreting, this is the thing, we grew up in school systems. Like kids go to school from a very young age, and then, you know, we get sent out to the world as adults, and increasingly that's happening later and later, because people go back and they do second degrees. They stay in school so that they don't have to worry about their loans, or, you know, like regardless of how you feel about how this came to be and the systemic factors, like this is kind of what's happening. I finished school at 22. I went straight in from high school. Whether it was the right decision for me, it probably isn't for a lot of other people. But like we're used to that sort of box and structure. Like I still haven't been out of school for longer than I was in it. Right. So, I mean, that's a long time. And I think giving yourself parameters, like, again, there are artists that work very well in chaos and like thrive in mess and
for sure,
and all these things. I'm not one of those people, so I'm definitely not the person to talk to about it. But also, like, having parameters, having a story, having a thesis statement, a purpose, a sentiment, having something to govern or to ground the piece of art you're working on making, regardless of its length, regardless of its intention, right? Like having something there that's like, this needs to be the founding principle. That's really, really useful in terms of like getting you to the end of a project, but also in terms of passing that BS test and seeing what actually makes sense here, right? If you're doing,
like having a checklist at the end where it's like, did I hit all the things that make this a project? You know, and it's complete. We've got all these things. It's helpful to know when you're done.
and it's interesting because like sometimes that comes through as you're making the project, right? As you're doing it. One of my pieces on my last record, Aftermath, is about the space between "Will you marry me?" and the answer to the question. That's the entire thesis statement of this piece. It's mostly like very sweet and very thoughtful, but there's this chord shape that came into my head that shows up a bunch of times, and and then often it's accompanied by a long pause, and it's this big suspension, and it's just like, what is the answer, right? And that's this way of sort of coming back to the theme, and then at the end of it you get this very big triumphant, like, the answer is probably yes. I have more thoughts on that, but the piece is a standalone. That's sort of the idea. And so every element that goes into that piece, including like who my soloists were, like I picked I guess now one married man and one engaged man in my band, because they were both like very, you know, they're lifelong people. They found their person. That's their person forever. And they're super open and honest about it. And their partners are great. Right. And to just have that sort of like very pure hearted love is not a thing you see a whole lot these days. And I mean, not necessarily by anybody's fault. Everyone has their drama, but it's such a beautiful thing. And of course, those are the stories that I want.
Yeah. To take that and use that as the record, you know, like it's your song that's setting this up, but then for a soloist, that's a very personal expression and interpretation of what's happening. So using those themes like that, that's really good though. Like, you know, it's like, tell them this story. They're going to go to that moment and they're going to relive that. And that's going to come out in the playing. And that's really cool.
I think it's fun because also, like, it's not like that's the story you need to have. That's not a prerequisite for playing that solo, right? But if you have that depth of perspective, and a big thing for me working with my band is always like, you don't need to get the finer details. Like, it doesn't need to be this specific story that you're thinking of. But I'm super open with my bands, especially when the tunes are coming from personal places. I'm like, this is what it feels like. Here is your material. Right? When you play these parts or when you play these motifs, like if you're going to solo over the section, this is your character. This is your you know, this is your sort of sentiment. This is the thing I want you to be thinking of. With that piece in particular, Love Is on the Line, it was like, this is your montage. This is the montage of your relationship from the beginning to where it is now. And like, in another piece that I do, I wrote a piece about bipolar mania. And so it was like, okay, so what are the symptoms of mania? It was like, I know what it feels like, and it feels like this to me, but also this is what you could draw from that I don't necessarily have personal experience with, but shows up in other variants of bipolar disorder or shows up more drastically. If we've done pieces about like science fiction, and it's like, no, you don't need to have seen season 3 episode 4 of Battlestar Galactica, but that's essentially right. It's like some of it is very specific and very niche and very small, and some of it is a lot more sort of sweeping and expanding and like or aspirational in some ways. And the idea when I tell these stories to my band and I'm telling them sort of what their characters are and who I want them to be and these roles I want them to play, it's not like you have to be this person. It's like, I want you to take this and put your own spin on it and then bring it back. And that translation process, going from like, this is my image of a thing I've never experienced because I'm 28, and like out into the world of like someone who actually does know what they're talking about, does know what aging is like, and is, you know, and just has a different perspective than me. Like that translation process is what makes, that's the alchemy of the band. That's what makes the art, right? Yeah. Because I don't have their stories and they have bits of mine, and then we get to bring it together and it makes something cool.
So with the band, is it still, are you still doing with Socialist Night School? Is that?
Yeah. So I run 3 projects. I have a trio called the Chelsea McBride Group, mostly covers jazz standards. I miss that. I miss all of this. I have a pop jazz sextet called Chelsea and the Cityscape. All our stuff's on Spotify. We have 2 EPs and a full-length album. And I have a 19-piece big band called Chelsea McBride Socialist Night School. That's when I've been talking about our last record. I'm talking about Aftermath, which came out on November 1st last year and is all about conflict in its various forms, internal, interpersonal, collective, societal. It starts with a piece about the 2016 US election. And continues downhill.
Yeah. I think it's really, the first word that comes to mind is impressive, that you're able to get 19 musicians, historically very flaky people, in on a project and commit to it. Like one of my favorite pictures from the last little while in your news feed was the picture of everybody crammed on that plane when you guys were off doing the show. And it was a really insane thought, because it's like, I've seen you guys on stage, I've seen this stuff, but like the fact that you guys are all on a plane and everybody's happy because they know they're getting taken care of, and this is a thing that's like used to be regular, a big band going and having everything done, and that doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. But you seek out to do this thing in this medium.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it's like progressive in a way. Like it's very exploratory, but not in like a avant-garde kind of way.
I mean,
it's like
my existence in the scene is progressive, which is probably enough of the problem. I mean, I look real white, but like I watched as the number of women in my bands and programs dwindled drastically the further I went into music and into rep bands and into education, right? And the fact that while, privileged check, I'm super white passing, and that's totally a fair read on me. I'm not. I'm half Japanese, and that's super cool. The fact that I get to have the level of success that I do, which does include, yes, having toured a big band across Canada once upon a time, not without its hardships either. I am super lucky in that the people in my band they're the best, right? In what I was saying before about like having friends that are very open and very supportive and very just like good people that you want in your circle to deal with whatever comes your way. I feel very strongly that my band has the same thing going for them in spades, especially on these gigs, right? And when you're on the road with people for a long time, you can start to get on each other's nerves and it can start to be tense. That never happened I've been on tours where that's been hard, but with my band, it's always been fine. And that doesn't mean that we've agreed on everything or it's gone perfectly. It's just that the communication is there. Things are really easily resolved. We're all coming from this place of like, we want what is best for the band, for the tour. We want to like hang out with all these people that we like. We don't all need to like each other. In a 19-piece band, you don't need to hang out with everyone, which is also kind of nice if you're, you know, I'm an introvert. A bunch of my band members are introverts. Some of them are not. And that's like, it's this whole balance of ages and like, you know, genders. We have like a fairly diverse cast of people. There's about a 40-year age gap between the oldest and youngest members of the band. Like, that's really special and hard to find in the arts sometimes, especially here in Toronto, where that sort of generational intermingling doesn't happen nearly as often as it could. But I think more importantly, like, I have the best of the best. And as do a lot of people who are fortunate enough to be making music around Toronto, as do, you know, if you're in an arts center across the world, like, you need to find your people. And when you find your people, a lot of those details start to take care of themselves.
Right.
And I vividly remember at my last meeting, I had a travel agent who helped me book large chunks of that tour. So I did all the sort of performance, band managing, who's staying with who. We had a lot of like, if you have family in the city, you don't need to stay with the band because then I don't have to pay for a hotel room. Right. And
push a reunion that's like, it's a bit of a write-off.
That's the family aspect, right? A lot of my bandmates were like, I think I'd like to stay with my parents. It's like, if I don't have to pay another $100 a night, I love you, but I will take this discount. And so with that sort of level of communication and openness, also like, what is the minimum standard for what you need to come on this tour with me? That was all, I mean, that was all super out there, partly because it was public money going into this tour. Like, you can Google and find out the amount of grant money I've gotten in the last few years. It's a lot. I am very lucky. And then, having a band that was super on board and ready to do this adventure with me, having a travel agent that was, you know, able to help me navigate some of the difficulties there. It was really funny sitting down at that last meeting and looking at the binder, and, you know, my poor travel agent sitting on the other side being like, why are there only 10, like, why is there less rooms here than there are here? And why is this person not on? And I was just like, I have 18 other limbs that are my bandmates, and I can tell you exactly where every one of them is supposed to be at any given time. It's about a month out from tour, and so I'd been looking at this itinerary like over and over and over again. I was like, I think it'll be okay. And it was fine. I mean, I am also lucky, to circle back to the organizational thing. My brain works like that. It can stick things in boxes and it can figure out how this works together. And I'm really good with stuff like that, which is not a skill that a lot of other people have. And my advice really there is either get good or like find your person, because you don't need to manage your own stuff. I mean, like, it's hard to say that now when we really are so independent, but you do want someone, if it's not you, on your team or helping you or whatever it is, that is just crossing the T's and dotting the I's, because that is a skill that we lose the devil in details a lot of the time. And like, I don't want to be leaving my band member behind in Saskatchewan, right?
And $20 it would be Bruder. Falling asleep behind a bench or something, just like chasing a butterfly
like
somewhere
said,
with his
They were all in their hotel rooms. And if they weren't, no one told me, and I didn't know. I think that's the thing, is like, I mean, touring as much as I have, I've toured with Hooligan Boys and been on the road for some shenanigans, but honestly, they're pretty tame. Most of the time, because when you tour a lot, when you're in an uncomfortable car and you're sleeping on someone's floor and you're and everything hurts, and like, you don't want to know who's been farting in the car for the past few hours, but that's a thing. Or like, you know, you need your space away from people, and sometimes that's just sleep. It's really not. It's not rock and roll.
If it's constant performance too, you need time to recharge so you can give the next performance the attention and the passion that it deserves, right? Like,
people forget, or alternatively just don't know, how tiring a lot of this work is. Being creative and working 40 hours a week is just about impossible, because it takes resources. It takes more resources than you put out. I mean, first of all, no one in an office is actually working a 40-hour a week. That is very unlikely.
No way.
Even if they are, though, right? The energy that goes into being creative is so much more than what is coming out there. And it's different. It doesn't just tire you out in the sense of like, my brain has been crunching numbers for 8 hours. It's like, I have been pondering the nature of the universe and the size and relationship of all things. And like, I need to go to bed. Right? It's a different kind of energy that goes into it. And it's a different kind of tired. And I think that is something that doesn't necessarily get recognized if you haven't had that creative aspect.
It definitely doesn't, because there's still all of the, I guess, traditional work things being taken care of on top of the creativity aspect, which lights up your whole brain.
Yeah.
So it's like this, you're doing a regular person's work on top of all this other stuff that has to come with it. And like, no wonder every musician just goes crazy or like has drug addiction, or
we all have our
like
things,
whatever.
right?
Like, it's like, it burns you out like hard.
And I think it's really interesting that we're now getting to a point where we can talk about addictive behaviors in the arts and mental health in the arts, because for a long time it was that sort of very macho culture of like, you know, you have to put up and you have to push through. And like, as a woman in the industry, there's a lot where it's just like, oh, you're just going to have to deal with this because you're a woman. And it's like, are we past this yet? Can we be past this? Like, I feel this way. And I, again, like, have been super lucky, have not faced, you know, nearly the worst depths of the horrors that are still out there. And part of that is choosing your people and having a good instinct, but a good instinct is learned as much as it is just like in your body too, right? I have not seen the worst of the worst. I will not pretend to have seen the worst of the worst. But even I am standing here like, can we be done with this yet? I would like my existence to not be an anomaly.
It's like we've seen all the stories, we've heard it all, and we've gone back. We have enough distance between us and the not so distant past of like music history to hear all of these stories about people and hear experiences on every degree of the spectrum, and be like, okay, there's a lot more we need to be open about and we need to deal with. And it's just, I know I've seen a lot of your posts in the past where you were just straight up calling out ridiculous sexist situations that you have encountered, whether it's just like, you know, on the city bus, or whether it's in like a working situation. Like, I think one of them was where it was like nobody would introduce a woman unless it was like the lovely so-and-so. And it was always somehow like there's like a sexuality or a physical look tied to you as a person, instead of like, here's this soloist about to rip your face off with musical talent. It's always like, well, they got a dress on. Here's the lovely so-and-so. And like,
I mean, that's been a thing for a while. That actually is a story from when I was in high school, not from my high school. But there was a band in a neighboring school district. They had one girl that played all the solos, and she was amazing. It's super cool. And her teacher, without fail, every single time introduced her as the lovely and talented. And I started using that on the guys in my band because I was just like, ugh, like, no, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. She is lovely and was then, and is talented and was then. And she also worked her butt off and did then. And like this never, by leading with what we look like and all of that, it invalidates all this shit we're trying to do. Like, we're here, we're working. And that's the problem with the industry, as it has been and still is in a lot of ways, is it's like, oh, if you're not like, I mean, you could expand this to the world in general, but it's like, oh, if you're not a white dude, then like, did you really work for it? And it's like, yeah, probably. And then on top of that, probably dealt with a lot of discrimination along the way, or dealt with being told that you aren't welcome, or dealt with, you know, open hostility in some ways, dealt with being mistaken for other people in like a not cool, racist, subconscious way. And I think people are like, oh, but that's not so bad. It's like, yeah, it's not so bad if it happens to you once, right? Like in my entire time at Humber, I got mistaken for another girl like one time, and that was fine, right? Like we were friends, we kind of looked alike. This kid had no idea what he was talking about. It was totally an innocent mistake.
Yeah.
But if that happens to you once a week, you're like, can you even tell the difference? Like you know that like I wear glasses and she does, like like they're just not looking at you, right? And the idea with all the stuff that has been happening lately is like we need to actually look at each other and like take that seriously. We're all people. We're all just trying to do our thing and get by, and like in whatever form that takes. But the problem is that we have collectively been pretty terrible to a lot of people, the majority of people, really. If we like filter out like anyone who is like not cis and white and male, right, and straight, the like that's most of the population. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of people. And you also have cis white dudes that are like, hey, this happened to me too. It's like, wow, can we just stop with all of this? Like, this isn't helping anybody. What we're doing is we're creating this culture where it's like, oh, we're going to make people feel unwelcome. And the move that I think we are slowly but surely making, I would hope, is that we're trying to make a world where everyone is welcome. Right. Yeah. And that is going to happen in fits and starts, and it's going to be tough. But like, I want a music scene where we can have all of this, where we can have thinky jazz and experimental new music that borders on theater and pop music, and made by anybody, right? By like our Black trans pals, by our super queer friendos. And like, again, I check a lot of privilege boxes. I am one to talk, but the whole scene, music, the world in general is better when we have diverse voices, because we have perspectives that like, me in my comfy little box in my comfy little house, like that's there. I don't know. I could use some more influences from people that I don't look like. I think that's good for everybody. Like, I think it's just good for culture and for understanding and for making a world where we can all actually just make art in.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Well, I mean, we're just at about an hour. So I and we've hopped around, and it's been very intriguing, engaging. We're checking off all these boxes pretty naturally that I was like, I want to get to this, and this. And so that makes me happy, is I just kind of get to sit back and all right, do your thing.
Do your thing, yeah.
Yeah, but if you want to give one last round of like anything you're plugging, or you want to send people in a certain direction and be like, check this out, please.
I am on the internet at www.crymmusic.com. That's crymmusic.com. I am on Bandcamp at crymmusic.com. I am on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at crymmusic. I don't have anything on the go right now because I am taking advantage of this pandemic time to write some music and do some things that practice, play. I'm learning ukulele. It's not going. It's going just fine.
Hey, it's out like, there and it's happening. So that's something that's like, that's a new skill I got.
it's person time right now. I'm taking advantage of this time where I still have a little bit of money and savings and nothing to do, to just like do me for a bit. So there isn't a lot going on, but when things do start to open up and get busy again, that's where you will find the happenings.
Excellent. Well, be sure to I'll post links and everything with when this goes up, and everybody will be able to find you wherever this ends up, probably in the South Pacific garbage patch somewhere.
GPGP.
Yeah. But I really, really appreciate you sacrificing some of your valuable time to sit and just chat about music life with me, because the whole purpose of MFile and everything we're trying to do with this is just talk more about music and all the little things that go into it, because there's a lot. And hopefully any part of a conversation that we have, or any part of a post or anything that turns that light bulb on for somebody and is like, okay, yeah, I can do this, then that's a win. That's a win. Like,
I love it.
So yeah, thank you very much, and take care and stay safe and stay very, very, very busy. Because
Well, thank you for having me.
you totally thrive on the busy.
I do my best. Thanks for having me.
Okay, awesome.
Right. Back sweatier than ever, as you can see. It's like 1,000 million degrees. Got these lights on, and it's naturally making things way better. I think it's like 35, 36 degrees outside, so whatever. But I'm really lucky that I've made so many solid connections throughout my musical journey. To be able that's just the first of many interviews that I'll have the privilege of conducting, and conversations I get to have and bring to the table to all of you guys who are hopefully very interested and want to learn more about what goes on in the process, how to get into it, different aspects of music that are happening that maybe you didn't really even think about. So yeah, I'm really happy that we're pulling all of this together with twine and twigs at this point, but I mean, you just do it and you get better as you go. So next portion, we are going to be talking about some tips, guide, chords, just random strings of words while I bring up my things here. So we're going to talk about chord progressions. Chord progressions are a very important part of writing. I feel like a lot of emphasis a lot of the time, especially with guitar, it's flashy guitar solos and playing fast and getting good with scales and everything like that, but you really got to own those chord progressions. So you're a musician or songwriter, wants to write better music without running out of new song ideas, and start applying these steps immediately to get started correctly with your chord progression efforts. Ew. Step 1. This is a really important one. Having a destination to aim for in your progression. So often when you're starting out with writing your own music, the vast majority of what comes through you is direct imitation. This isn't a bad thing. It's exactly how you need to be learning practically, but breaking free of the process of pure just taking and starting to trust your own creative instincts can be really daunting. Having that first chord as a starting point is probably where you would place a lot of the weight, your creative brain. This seems like it would be the obvious thing to do, but to really bring your chord progressions to life, you need to also consider where you are going just as much, if not more, than where you start. The term chord progression isn't just incidental. The word progression is in there for a reason, so put it to work. If you make your song move, if you make the melody go places, take the listener on a journey. Tell a story not just with words and lyrics, but with music. So in the same way that an author will start from the beginning, writing a crime novel or a detective story, having a clear destination to aim for makes every nuanced move that much more intentional, meaningful. Now, I can vouch for those of you who are thinking songs with one or two chords might not need to worry about something like that. But many of those songs are still applying the use of different inversions of chords, or different inversions of those one or two chords, create keeping the song from sounding stale or repetitive, staying in the same spot. So be really conscious of the notes that are in the chord you are progressing towards in your passage. Use this to your advantage, build your progression, put you in a position where you can truly approach the chord to feel like it's the destination. Using the proper chord or inversion of a chord can help create a half-step movement towards the notes in your destination chord. The root note of the chord might be your fallback, but if you find that you're relying on this too often, a lot of your stuff is sounding the same, try aiming for the 3rd or the 7th in the destination chord. These are some of the juicy notes that really give the chord its flavor. Another idea is to try a chord or inversion that has one or more shared notes with the chord that you're aiming for in the progression. It has a great effect on the overall sound, so emphasizing these notes will be appreciated by the listener. All right. Step number two. Don't be afraid to use chords that might sound weird or ugly. The cliche of never judge a book by its cover comes into play here. A chord doesn't exist in a vacuum. When you hear something in a chord that your ear might find not overly pleasing, that doesn't mean that it is a chord that should be avoided. Context and placement are everything when it comes to the chords used in a progression. There is a concept in tonal harmony known as tonal gravity. It's the idea that each note in a scale has a desire to go somewhere to be released. So after the key center of a piece of music, the root of a chord is established, notes are pulled in a certain direction based on their position. Notes within a chord that are spaced closer together create more tension. The more clusters within a chord, that dissonance can be used to build to the release of the next chord. Tension or dissonance within a chord can be heightened even further by their distance from the root note. An example would be the interval of C, D flat, which is a minor second, or C and B, which is a major seventh. They're much more tense intervals than, say, C and E, which is a major third, and C and B flat, which is a minor seventh. Something to think about, people. All right, step number 3. I put my hand up and I did 4. Maybe I was going for German 3. Step number 3. Be aware of the levels of tension and release being created. So the idea of most music can be boiled down to the concept of tension and release. This is a fundamental concept behind all storytelling. It gets the audience emotionally invested because we are all a sucker for a little bit of drama. That doesn't mean high drama all the time. You need to be aware of the amount of drama and tension and give appropriate release over the course of the song. Now, you've all seen a movie that was boring as hell, no payoff, and equally as many that are constant in your face explosion for 94 minutes, and that loses its effect quickly. So you need to think about the overall arc of the song as a whole, and then break down each section of the song to appropriately shape it, and further again. This kind of thinking can elevate your songwriting to bring a better payoff, not just for your listener, but for you as well. This requires a lot of extra awareness on your part as a musician and as a student. trusting your instincts and being objective about the work for the benefit of what the song is asking you for. Nailing this is an accomplishment in itself. So once again, being aware of the notes and the chords will be a big help in pulling this off. The same idea of tonal gravity from the previous step can be used between two different chords. Let's say a D flat or a B, moving a half step to a C. That creates a strong sense of tension and release. Taking the time to analyze what notes are contained in the chord you are moving to allows you to make more compelling decisions when it comes to chord and inversion choices. So if you put these 3 ideas into practice with your songwriting, you'll begin to notice a difference in the results immediately. And your audience will too. And while they may not know what's going on behind the curtain, they will definitely thank you for it. Now, keeping on that chord party train, let's talk about the 4 different types of chords. I really hope that this is going to work, because for some reason it disappeared. It wouldn't work. What do we? Boom! Awesome. All right, let's talk about the 4 different types of chords. Got our happy keyboard. Happy to be here. It's laid out already to give us some context visually for what I am talking about. So we are accidentally moving this. Oh, you. All right. We will fix this very quickly. Like I said before, it wouldn't be a live stream without a baby knocking on your door or things going completely bonkers. Okay. Patience, children. Where are my hotkeys? See, of course, this was working like minutes ago when I set this up. So naturally, as soon as I get ready to do it, everything falls apart, disappears. Next. Doot. Previous slide. Doot. There we go. All right, so the first type of chord is a major chord. Now, what consists of a major chord? What makes a chord a major chord? So in the key of C, the basic major chord would be a major triad, 3 notes. You got C, E, and G. Now, the interval between C and E is a major third. So that's 4 semitones up there, if you are keeping track on your piano. Or on your guitar, that'd be, what, 4 frets? So the distance there, that makes it a major third. That's the strong identifier of a major chord, is the 3rd note in the chord is major. So beyond that, there's 3 semitones up to the next note, the 5th. So that makes the semitone pattern of a major chord 4-3. You got 4 semitones to the 3rd and 3 semitones to the 5th. And always remember, it's the 3rd that's going to tell you what kind of chord it is. At least give you a foundation to start with. Oh, good. We get some extra ones. Okay, so a minor chord. Again, we are in the key of C, but starting on D. We've got D, F, and A as our minor triad. And then they disappear. And then... So we've got 3 semitones this time up to the third, which means it's a minor third. Therefore, that tells us it's a minor chord. There's 4 semitones up to the next note, the fifth, which means that the semitone formula for a minor triad is 3/4, if that's what you're remembering this by. So beyond major and minor, I mean, these are chords you've probably heard of and used many, many times. There are 2 separate chord types, or chord groupings, I guess, beyond this. So dominant is an interesting one. And I'll show you why. Because we've got a major triad starting on G, G, B, D. Got that major third there. And it's 4 semitones to the major third, 3 to the fifth, but that's just a major triad, right? Isn't that just a major triad? So what makes a dominant chord? All you need for a major chord is just those 3 notes. Anything else on top of that is kind of extra. For it to be a dominant chord, you have to have a 7th. A dominant 7th chord. So when you see dominant or dominant 7, the 7th is implied if it is a dominant chord. So we throw an F on there because that's the next note in the key of C, and it is the 7th of the G dominant 7 chord. Now this, interestingly enough, is a minor 7th. Oops. If it were to be a major 7, it would be an F sharp. But it isn't a major 7, it's a minor 7. So that's a really important relationship between the B, the major third, and the F, a minor 7th. That is what gives the dominant chord that bizarre tension, instability that needs to be resolved. The fact that G is the 5th of C and B is only a half step away from C. Combine that with that instability created between the B and the F, that weird tritone interval, that gives us a really strong tension salad. So this chord wants to be released and will go to C, and everyone will be happy. So the next grouping has 2 different types of chords in it, but they belong in the same group, and we'll explain. So diminished chords. Diminished chords are kind of weird. They sound very unsettling, and that's for one very specific reason. So oddly enough, we have these notes again, B, D, F. Now there are 3 semitones up to D, which means it is a minor third. But if it were just a minor chord, it would be B, D, F sharp, but it's not. So that 5th is only 3 semitones away, which means it's a minor interval, but you can't fifth notes, the 5 can't be minor. It's supposed to be stable. It's a very, like, 1 and 5 are the most stable notes that you can have in that chord. So if you mess with that 5, you're messing with the foundation. So it's not just minor, it is now diminished. That is what makes the chord diminished. If 5th has been lowered, now you got a crazy, wacky chord that you got to do. So augmented belongs in this same grouping for the same reason, because we're messing with that fifth again. So if we had F, A, C, F to A is 4 semitones, so that's a major third. And if we go up to C, that would be a fifth. But if we move it up a semitone to C sharp, we have 4 more semitones, which means, well, it's not a major interval, even though it's those 4 semitones, but we're messing with that 5 in the chord. So that means that we've, instead of lowering it, like in the diminished chord, we push it up, and it's been augmented. So that means that diminished and augmented chords are in a grouping of their own, where you're either raising or lowering the fifth. So yeah, that would be the formula of 4/4. Diminished would have been 3/3. And we have our pretty keyboard. So that kind of goes to show you a bit about how you can really boil down all of the differences and things you might see in chord charts or music to really just these 4 types of chords. And it's that simple. I mean, anything else is extra. You have a 7 or a 9 or 11 or a sharp 5 or whatever. That doesn't always dictate what's going on. Usually you will have to identify if it is major or minor. If you know that it's major, you check that 7, because it could be a major 7 or it could be a dominant 7, a completely different type of chord. And the point of these 4 chord types is that when you see that, that's a really strong indicator of how you react to the chord. There are rules that come with that chord that will indicate how you behave with it, what you can do with it, or not do with it. I mean, music is crazy in that way. So, we're gonna do a little bit of record pickings. Vinyl pickings, sorry. Basically, I will dive deep into my vinyl collection and pull out a record that I think is really awesome, had a big impact on me, or I just really like it, and talk to you about it. So, our record for this week, Curtis Mayfield, Back to the World. Try and get it so there's not so much shine. There we go. Sorry, Curtis. Man, what a powerhouse this record is. It's so good that it, in more than one occasion, has brought me to or close to tears. Especially Right On for the Darkness. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. It is just huge. And if anybody knows Curtis Mayfield from a more pedestrian or casual association, they usually know the Superfly soundtrack, which is an incredible album. I mean, it's a movie soundtrack, but I feel like it stands so much on its own in popularity beyond the movie. More people have heard that album than have watched that movie. I'm fairly certain. But it's a really strong Curtis just stepping into his own. You know, he had a few, probably 3 records before that, and they're very big. He's a huge composer, which I really admire, because it's not him relying on somebody in the studio to write all these big arrangements with all these horns and strings and everything else. You know, he knows exactly what he wants to get out of these songs in these very large arrangements. And so he went really deep into it on Superfly, which was awesome. And, you know, he gets a lot of fame and success and big Hollywood money. And so now, you know, this is the next record, 1973. And it's kind of like taking all of these lessons and all of these things that he's been focusing on for so long. I would say it's the pinnacle, but I'm also very partial to Sweet Exorcist, which is just incredible. But this album specifically is a really, really awesome study of it from a songwriting perspective, large ensemble writing, mood, because it's one of the funkiest records, but it's also got some very deep emotional kind of pockets where it just takes you there, you know, and it's so wonderful. But also some very tough, dark material in the lyrics. He's a very, you know, I wish he were alive today to see all of the stuff going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, how hard people are fighting for equal rights among the races, because that was what this guy stood on. He was very much about the civil rights movement and moving people to improve and be better than they were all the time and move things forward. And he was an angry guy, and he had tons of reasons to be angry with the state of the world that he was in. And there is no shortage of that on this album. It is emotionally charged, it's racially charged, but it really speaks to a purity of kind of filtering emotion and hope through all of that anger, and just creating one of my favorite albums of all time. So that is Curtis Mayfield, Back to the World. Notable track for me was Right On for the Darkness. That one is like one of those moments that just changed my musical life for the better. Because I was cooking and that song came on, and by the end I had spaced out and I had to turn the stove off and go put this song on again and really listen to it. Yeah, so that's my suggestion. I hope you like it. If you don't, still check it out and just find what you can learn about it. So that being said, let's check out some various images for this week. Pull this bad boy up. Beep boop. I'm gonna add a source. Gonna add a new source. This is one of those things that it's like, why didn't you do it before, Dan? Oh, Denny, you're so funny. Yeah, I did. That's the problem. All right, so first picture here. Why is it sideways? Why are you sideways? Beep. And let's transform it. All right, so there we go. Get out of here. So this is a unfortunately heavily compressed image of my workspace. Now, I'm very proud of this workspace. This was a long time coming to be able to put this together. Having all of my work, all of my recording gear up and ready to go. My guitars are hanging on the wall. I've got the photography lights for if I need to shoot videos. Got my filing cabinet full of all of my school notes. Everything I've ever written down on paper is in there and organized for if I'm writing anything. And I can't tell you how important it is to have this and to continue to build on this. you know, even just for a musical or writing situation, getting this the way that I want it, it's going to be a continuing process. But for you as a musician or a writer, you need to get rid of all the obstacles to making your music as you can, and being able to have this space where I can sit down, get things up and running, and go create in the smallest amount of time just means that I have more success with the finite amount of time that I can deliberately put towards being creative. And I think that's a very, very important thing that everybody out there should really try and do and focus on. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect. You don't need the ultimate sound cave. But as long as you have something and are working towards making it better and improving it, it's only going to improve you as you go. Very important. So, next one here. I thought this was really cute. Oh, good. It's also weird and clockwise. Please, come back to me. Boom. You're only two emotions when you're an artist. Just let the pain of this one sink in. It really is. I wonder the correlation between people who are in the arts and people with some type of spectrum of bipolar, really. Because this will be painfully true for probably 99.9% of you out there. You are riding that wave of feeling great, being special. I'm a musician, I'm an artist, I create from nothing. And then you're just having a day where nothing's coming, but everything relies on you building upon this mountain of creativity that you were just shouting from. And if it's not happening, it's very hard, very difficult not to take that 100% personally, internalize that as somehow it's your fault. So that really is a tough battle to have to come up against. And it's going to happen, and you need to be aware of it. You need to take proper steps to counteract it, or, it's easier to prevent a fire than it is to be constantly putting one out. So finding accountability, or just like self-health kind of checkup buddies to talk about these things with, and being more open. It's a really good way to kind of identify your triggers for what might set you off and be like, fuck, I can't do this, before they happen and shut everything down. Because the most important thing as an artist, as a musician, you gotta do the work. You gotta get it done. If you don't get it done, no one else will. So that's a really, really important thing that you've got to cover. Okay. Next we've got this little tidbit here. Oh, what did I do? What did I do? Okay. Extreme close-up on PlayStation collection. Yes. There we go. This is my son, and he is having just the best time with my Chord Electribe sampler and our daughter's imported karaoke mic. And he's there with my amp and my video game collection in the background. But I knew that I was going to raise my child as at least being immersed in music. It's a big part of my life, and it's going to be around whether he wants it to or not. But music has always been a very big part of our relationship. Dancing with him to some of my favorite records as a way to get him ready for bed is, that's been part of the bedtime routine since he was born. And so he dances and he loves when music comes on. He demands records to be put on, and he sees all my music stuff. He sees me play guitar. He wants to play the guitar. He sees this, it's got flashing beeps and boops and everything, but it also makes noise. So he's down. And it's just really awesome to see, because while it's everywhere, in no way is it being forced. It's not like I'm taping a guitar to his hand and is like, you're going to be the next friggin' Yngwie Malmsteen, or I'm disowning you. That's never a thought, but there's just so much to learn and gain from music just as a person. I don't care if he doesn't have any musical talent. I'm not going to disown him. I'm not going to love him any less. But the freedom to explore music as a child when you have no barriers is just so important that, we don't have to look at music as how much money are you going to make from it. This is a facet of just being a human, having a soul. So I think it's really important that he's just exposed to it and exposed to as much different music and avenues of making music as possible. So this last one we've got here, it didn't change, because of course it didn't. This last one, this is an old photo. Whoops, what happened? Yes, this is a very old photo from, I believe, 2010. So 10 years ago. This is at the McIntyre Theater at Mohawk College. And this was our entire ear training class in second year. And our big final project was Learning Because by the Beatles. So we had all our different sections for all the different harmony parts, and everybody sang it at the final Beatles Ensemble concert, which was actually really awesome to be a part of both of those things. So there I am, off to the very left, struggling to keep time. And out front conducting us was our excellent professor and incredible musician with such a long laundry list of a resume. And I'm very lucky to have been able to call him friend, Darcy Hepner. This picture sums up so much of music school for me, because there was so much friendship and camaraderie and working together and just doing really, really interesting things that while we were doing it, we were having so much fun, but I don't really know that it's until afterwards that you realize the significance of such an undertaking, and to nail it like we did. Like it was powerful to hear all of these human voices singing such a beautiful vocal song together as one, it's a really big accomplishment to be able to do that. So I just wanted to share that picture and let everybody know how awesome this kind of thing can be. So if you can find a local choir or some kind of group of people that just like singing, singing really is one of the best medicines for the soul. It's kind of built in to our DNA. So this final picture here, in this one, of course it's all ridiculous. There we go. This is a quote from Beethoven. "Music is like a dream, one that I cannot hear. One of the remarkable and well-known facts about the master Ludwig van Beethoven was that he was deaf. And that's always been a thing that people kind of question about, like, oh man, how was he able to do that when he was deaf? And knowing that he wasn't born deaf, but started going deaf very early in his life, like as an adult. I mean, he had the hearing and wherewithal to learn music all that time, but still to compose the way that he did in silence by the end of his life is as heartbreaking as it is powerful. You know, there's letters of him writing to friends and family while he's on vacation and talking about, like, revealing what this illness that is taking away his hearing. And it's incredibly moving because he was so passionate and he was in crisis as this was happening. Like, I can't even imagine how many times he must have told himself that this is it. I will no longer have music. But somehow, against all odds, he stayed on that path and did it without his ears. So listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and realizing that it was written by someone who was probably as close to 100% deaf as you can be. I mean, whatever excuses you've got for not working on your music, they seem pretty shitty when you keep this one in your pocket. So don't let anything stop you, because your masterpiece may just be on the other side of that obstacle that is giving you so much trouble. So that being said, it's time for me to turn these lights off and go eat my now probably cold dinner. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and this has been a lot of fun, and we'll obviously be tweaking with things, and I'll try my best to find ways around all of our technical issues, but I really appreciate you joining me in the present and in the future, wherever you may get this information from. So that said, I'm Dan Weiss from MFile Music Theory and Songwriting, and this has been Infinite Musician TV. You have to become the musician you are supposed to be so you can create the music that you hear in your head.